We open in welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land, who live on in their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomac Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing so that all together shall one day know full justice. Thèse is a community in France founded after World War II, where Catholic, Anglican, and Protestant monks come together as an act of unity within the Christian church. See, silence that phone. Their daily prayer services are open to all and are streamed on YouTube. Most of the service is sung along with the congregation and provides lots of space for silence. Many UUs find hope in their message and inspiration in their sung prayers. So again, to everyone here and everyone online, welcome to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Nancy Melito. My pronouns are she, her. I'm happy to be your worship associate today. If you are not new to Accotink, look around. Are there people you haven't seen in a while or you've never met? Please do meet them, say hello, speak with them, because we are intending to be a welcoming and inclusive community. So please share with each other your welcome to this, I'm sorry, get a little emotional, this sacred body of people who I think are here to do some good in the world. Now, whether you're a longtime member, a newcomer, or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our social hour online and in person immediately after the service. We're so delighted you decided to join us today. Welcome.
Good morning. It's good to be with you this morning. I'm Reverend Morgan McLean, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm happy to be a guest in the pulpit today while Reverend William Levewood is having a long weekend. How lovely. And I'm also happy to be a member of this congregation with my family. And while I don't, I just get to be a member because I serve the Unitarian Universalist Association now. I'm the director of the Global Connections Office at the UUA. And I think it's the best job because I get to talk to Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists around the world every day and learn something new about our faith and the ways that our tradition has grown and expanded. And you'll have a chance today too because Marcia White is here. Marcia, where are you? Marcia's in the back. And Marcia has a poster today of from Maulat, India, which is in northeast India, which this congregation has a long-time partnership with, shared with Mount Vernon Congregation, where you support the school that's associated with a Unitarian church there. And I'm very excited because I get to go there in March. So I'll tell you all about it when I'm back. Today's service, we're going to continue exploring the history of Unitarianism and Universalism. And just like a greatest hits album, it will be out of order, but it will be interesting. And I hope that it will introduce you to some little snippets. Just like on a greatest hits album, you never know the whole context of the song or the season of the artist's life, and so I encourage you, if something grabs you today, to keep reading about that and get even a larger picture. We start the service like almost all Unitarian Universalist congregations and congregations in Northeast India and in the Philippines by lighting the flaming chalice. Last week, the guest minister explored the history of the flaming chalice, a symbol that emerged during World War II as an official symbol on paperwork shared as people were working on getting refugees out of Europe. And today I'm hoping that the children and youth might help with the chalice lighting because we're going to be saying the words of the mission statement of Accotink UU Church, and the children have been working on a symbol. This summer we embodied that mission. So would you come up here if you're willing to show that? Together we care in community, grow in spirit, and act for justice. Should we try together one more time? All right, together we care in community, grow in spirit, and act for justice. So with that spirit, we'll put the flame in our flaming chalice and let that light be a beacon for us. And thank you, Nancy and Murtil. And we have, I also have some slides to show you today. So we're going to show you our first slide as I introduce our first hymn. This hymn was written by a Canadian Unitarian Universalist musician, Joyce Polly. She wrote it for a peace rally in 1986. She's been a long-time leader of UU musicians. She's taught generations of UU musicians about how to engage the congregations in singing and in music and learning together. And when our hymnal came out 30 plus years ago, care was given to changing some of the language in there. There was a lot of attention given to things like mankind. Who says mankind anymore? Not us, not the Unitarian Universalists. We say humankind. So you'll see evidence of that in the hymnal. One thing that has happened since then is that we've, in the past decade or so, become even more thoughtful about inclusivity and how words might exclude people with different abilities. So songs like One More Step might prevent some people from engaging in that song. So today I invite you to sing this song. We'll sing One More Step, but imagine not a physical step, but a progress towards a goal that needs everyone's participation. One more song, we will say one more song. want to introduce you on our next slide to Hosea Ballou. Hosea Ballou is known as the father of American Universalism. The Universalist, Hosea Ballou, was in New Hampshire and around New England and had hundreds of congregations at the time, small, passion-filled congregations that were led by the Spirit. And today I would say that the Universalists at that time were a little bit more like the Baptists, a little more Spirit-led, jumped up and had a sawdust trail and got people feeling their faith in a new way. The Universalists have that name because they believed in universal salvation, and that was everybody goes to heaven. That God was so loving that God would never let anyone go to hell, never spend eternity in punishment. And there's this story that comes from Hosea Ballou about muddy puddles. And who loves to jump in muddy puddles? Who doesn't love to jump in muddy puddles? When's the last time you jumped in a muddy puddle? Yeah. It's one of Peppa Pig's favorite things to do, right? So on this next slide, I'm going to show you this picture. That may look familiar to some. There was a muddy puddle, and she just couldn't resist, because sometimes there's things in life are just so fun. And Hosea Ballou said, do you clean your children after they've been playing in muddy puddles? Do you clean them because you've loved them? Or yes, you clean them because you've loved them, not because you're concerned. You're not going to punish them or leave them muddy forever. So he was saying God's love is like that it doesn't matter how dirty the child gets in the muddy puddles. You clean them because you love them. And we have brought that through our tradition, and now I know we've talked a lot about the new values, about that love at the center, about a radical love. And that is a pretty radical love to imagine there in the late 1700s, this radical idea that everybody, doesn't matter what the color of their skin was, what their gender was, what their religion was, everyone was going to feel that love. And everyone was going to be cleaned after jumping in the muddy puddles by the same God. So the Universalists continued that tradition, and here we are still loving the muddy puddles and still loving each other. We bless our children in song as they go to their Sunday school, their religious exploration classes every week, because we have this idea, we carry this forward. This congregation then becomes a reflection of that love. And I want to tell you about that song that we sing each week here, and we'll have the next slide, and I'll introduce you to James Reeb. This, you'll see in the order of service, this is called the Reeb Children's Recessional, because it was written by a man, Ian Rydell, who's now a UU minister, and he was serving the James Reeb congregation as their music director. James Reeb was a Unitarian Universalist minister who responded to Martin Luther King Jr.'s call for clergy to come to Selma. And James Reeb was one of the people attacked by white supremacists, and he died from injuries there in Selma. 4 days later, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a eulogy for James Reeb, saying that he demonstrated the conscience of the nation. He was an attorney for the defense of the innocent in the court of world opinion. He was a witness to the truth that men of different races and classes might live, eat, and work together as brothers. So when we sing that song to our children every week, that's the history that we carry forward and the promise that we put in to the future. So let's sing our children to their...
Go in love, our hearts go with you. Go in joy, our hopes go too. Learn in love and grow in wisdom. Shine your light in all you do.
We'll sing about the seasons of our lives with this next hymn, Lady of the Seasons, Laughter. We'll share a slide too, a picture of the person who wrote it, a UU minister, Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons. She's one of the most prominent ministers writing about humanism today within our UU tradition. Humanism's biggest influence on Unitarian Universalism came with the 1933 Humanist Manifesto, which was half of the people who signed it were Unitarians or Universalists at the time. Many Unitarian Universalists today consider themselves humanists, and many of those humanists have found great meaning in connecting with the cycles of nature, kind of redefining a natural religious humanism. This hymn, Lady of the Seasons, Laughter, also brings in the feminine divine symbolism. That was a time in the 1980s and 1990s within Unitarian Universalism when there was a resurgence of womanist spirituality, and UUs began to really explore and embrace earth-centered traditions. Our reading is from James Luther Adams, and we have a picture of him on a slide. He was a theologian and professor, a very important person in the last part of the 20th century, helping shape how Unitarian Universalists thought about themselves in relationship to congregations and how congregations build community. He saw the church as a voluntary association that attends to the psychological well-being of its members and as an organization that sets the direction of their collective behavior for promoting social, political, and economic change in the wider world. So Brenna and Nancy are going to read some of his words, and come on up, Brenna, and they're going to read. This is in the back of the hymnal. So that's the other thing I wanted to show you, that in the back of the gray hymnal you'll find many readings. We have plenty more modern resources you can find online, but in the hymnal you'll see a little chalice next to some people's names, and that's how you know that they were a Unitarian or a Universalist or a Unitarian Universalist.
I call that church free, which enters into covenant with the ultimate source of existence.
That sustaining and transforming power not made with human hands.
It binds together families and generations, protecting against the idolatry of any human claim to absolute truth or authority.
This covenant is the charter and responsibility and joy of worship in the face of death as well as life.
I call that church free, which brings individuals into a caring, trusting fellowship.
That protects and nourishes their integrity and spiritual freedom. That yearns to belong to the church, universal.
It is open to insight and conscience from every source. It bursts through rigid tradition, giving rise to new and living language, to new and broader fellowship.
It is a pilgrim church, a servant church on an adventure of the Spirit.
The goal is the prophethood and priesthood of all believers, the one for the liberty of prophesying, the other for the ministry of healing.
It aims to find unity and diversity under the promptings of the Spirit that bloweth where it listeth and maketh all things new.
Our people were preachers and poets, abolitionists, thinkers, and social movers. They were resilient, and their faith was too, through wars and unjust laws, through changing beliefs and new discoveries. They moved our living tradition forward, and as we have already discovered in this service, our faith grows year after year with new voices and new leaders. Today, the sermon is going to focus a bit on a certain time period. I want to introduce you to four Unitarians or Universalists, and I'm going to start in 1805 at Harvard Divinity School outside of Boston. There, they appointed a Unitarian professor of worship, and I'm grossly oversimplifying history here. But essentially, it literally changed the way the Massachusetts government functioned. You'll have to read about that on Wikipedia. But essentially, the Congregationalist had been the big group in Boston and in Massachusetts. And when Harvard, when the Unitarians kind of took over Harvard, then the Congregationalists were pushed out and the Unitarians became the most prominent group. They were already there. They were already the elite. They were the upper class. They were the educated doctors and lawyers. And now they were taking over the Congregationalist churches. And so if you have been in New England, if you've ever been in Massachusetts, there's literally like almost every little town has a square of grass. And on one side is the first Congregationalist church, and across the square is the first Unitarian church. Because what happened is that the Congregationalists were forced to leave the Unitarian church. They would say they kept the faith. They kept their Trinitarian faith when Unitarians started to talk about Jesus in a new way. Again, that was a gross oversimplification. But still in Boston, in the city of Boston, there are 3 historic churches, Unitarian Universalist churches within a mile of each other. There are 5 more within 5 miles. There are another 10 in the immediate metro area. And so Unitarian Universalism definitely felt its biggest influence there. One of those historic churches in Boston is First and Second Church, it's called now. First Church was brought to Unitarianism under their minister, William Emerson, who was the father of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who you may have been forced to read in high school. We have a slide for Ralph Waldo Emerson, please. He followed his family path into Unitarian ministry, but soon discovered it really wasn't for him, and he left serving as a congregational minister, a minister in a congregation, to instead focus on his writings and essays and giving lectures, and he became the public intellectual that we know of him today. In 1936, he published his first book, Nature, and founded the Transcendentalist Club, and he became an important figure in the Transcendentalist movement. The Transcendentalist historian Philip Gurra explains were represented by Emerson, and they felt the way to social reform was through individually perfected persons, those persons combining to create an improved culture. For Emerson, the word he used was transparent eyeball, That meant that there was no intermediary between himself and God, that cultivating his self-reliant intuition allowed him to see the wonders of nature and to see the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So that viewpoint, that transcendentalist viewpoint, naturally moved people to act in ways that benefited the whole of humanity. A couple years after he published Nature, he was invited to address the graduating class at Harvard Divinity School, and that speech is famous because it marks a significant change within Unitarianism. The Harvard Library Archives explains that in this speech, he proposed a counterweight to formal religion, not atheism, but a personal religious conscience and self-reliance, believing that a divine nature is present in all persons. This speech was an attack on Unitarianism, on the established kind of stodgy New England church, and Emerson was saying that people must experience faith and participate beyond just their intellectual engagement. He was not invited back to Harvard for 30 years after that. The change had already started. Transcendentalism had started to influence Unitarianism, and now we like to claim it, but if we were to go back in history, we might see them as more separate than we talk about it today. But Transcendentalism is taught as a literary movement, but it really was a spiritual movement, very much next to Unitarianism. Articulating this divine spark in each person made Emerson and most Unitarians abolitionists. Speaking in Concord, Massachusetts against the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, that act which mandated the return of enslaved individuals who had escaped to the North, Emerson said, "This is a law which every one of you will break on the earliest occasion. A law which no man can obey or abet without loss of his self-respect. Just now, the supreme public duty of all thinking men is to assert freedom. Go where freedom is threatened and say, I am from it, and I do not wish to live in a world a moment longer than it exists." We could maybe use that speech today. I have a short aside here that 1850 Fugitive Slave Act was signed into law by the 13th President Millard Fillmore. And although he never officially signed the book, he was affiliated with the Unitarian Church of Buffalo, New York, for 35 years. He took John Quincy Adams there, another Unitarian, and he also took President-elect Abraham Lincoln there. His presidency was short and focused on managing the growing tensions in trying to keep the Union together. And he was a Unitarian that was not on the right side of history. As happens, his decisions galvanized a new generation of abolitionists, really, including the founding of the anti-slavery Republican Party that ran its first candidate against Millard Fillmore in 1856. And in that election, Millard Fillmore was part of the newly founded American Party, which was, among other things, concerned that a large number of Catholic immigrants were threatening American life. Where have we heard that before? So he and the Republican candidate lost that election to James Buchanan. But at the same time, and we'll see this next slide, please, another prominent Unitarian was on the scene, Horace Greeley. And I think we can be a little more proud of him. And I live on Greeley Boulevard in West Springfield, and I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it's named after him. He was a hugely influential publisher with the New York Tribune. He's credited with coining the phrase, "Go west, young man, and grow old with the country." We know that that's a little problematic, right? That those settlers were not, it wasn't really their land. But he did that as he saw cities struggling with unemployment, and he wanted those, encourage those young unemployed men to go and find this American dream. He and his paper supported progressive causes. In 1944, he hired the transcendentalist Margaret Fuller as the literary advisor. And in 1851, the paper hired Karl Marx as a foreign correspondent. In 1848, Greeley filled an empty seat as a congressman for 3 months. And while he failed to get any of his bills passed, he did manage to make a lot of enemies, except one friend, the congressman from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. He supported Lincoln's presidency and still throughout was openly critical of him in the paper for not taking a more decisive action for abolition. Greeley used his powers of the press and his influence in politics to show people the truth of the evil of slavery and to introduce them to many more progressive ideas. In 1872, he ran for president as nominee of the new Liberal Republicans and Democratic Party, and he was defeated by the Republican Ulysses S. Grant. And if you want to know more about that, you'll have to ask my husband, who teaches this stuff. So, during that election process, Horace Greeley suffered personal and professional losses, and he died before the meeting of the Electoral College. His funeral was held at what's now called the Fourth Universalist Church in New York City. President Grant was there, along with many influential people, and he was remembered there for being an advocate for the downtrodden and the dispossessed. We know that Horace Greeley used his prominence to promote Universalist, Unitarian, and Transcendentalist views and values, and that those religious convictions were inseparable from the social justice issues of the time. So let's go back to 1859. Ralph Waldo Emerson is speaking again as an abolitionist. He spoke on behalf of John Brown, the man who attempted to raid a federal armory in Harper's Ferry, which is now in West Virginia, to support an armed revolt and destroy the institution of slavery. That was the goal of the raid. Emerson was speaking to raise funds for Brown's family, and this is where we meet our next Unitarian. And the next slide, please, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She was African American. She was born free in Baltimore in 1825. She was a dedicated abolitionist and supported John Brown and his family after that failed raid. And she was one of the few people who joined John Brown's wife, Mary, while they were awaiting John Brown's execution. He was ultimately charged for treason. They were sitting together in the home of Lucretia Mott in Philadelphia, Lucretia Mott being one of the leading Quaker abolitionists. Frances Harper wrote a letter and got it smuggled into John Brown's cell, writing, "I thank you that you have been brave enough to reach out your hands to the crushed and blighted of my race." Harper was a published poet and writer and is considered to be the first Black woman to make a living from writing in this country. She was an activist and a leader. She was affiliated also with the African Methodist Episcopal Church, but soon worked with the Unitarians in the abolition movement and the Underground Railroad in Philadelphia. In 1858, a year before that raid at Harper's Ferry, she refused to give up her seat on a segregated trolley in Philadelphia. And she traveled the country giving lectures and sharing her poetry and her essays. On one of those trips, she got very sick and she wrote her most famous poem, "Bury Me in a Free Land." The last stanza is, "I ask no monument, proud and high, to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves. She recovered from that illness and she lived until 1911. The stanza of that poem is on her grave marker, and it is also inscribed on the wall of Contemplative Court, that space for reflection at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. After the Civil War and after the abolition of slavery, Harper turned her writing and social justice work towards women's rights and the temperance movement. The temperance movement was supported by a lot of Unitarians and Universalists at the time. That's the movement. Now we call them teetotalers, maybe, to not have alcohol, but what they were doing was protecting women and children because men were coming back from the Civil War with what we would call now PTSD, and they were dangerous and abusive. And so the temperance movement was, and they were treating themselves with alcohol, and the temperance movement was really about protecting those families. She said, Harper was speaking at a National Women's Rights Convention, and she said, "We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul." She challenged women like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who didn't support the 15th Amendment to the Constitution that was passed and ratified after the Civil War, because it gave Black men the right to vote without giving all women the right to vote. In 1870, Harper joined the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, and then she would also organize the National Association of Colored Women with Harriet Tubman and Ida B. Wells. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper not sure if she ever met, but she would have certainly been in the same room for our next and final person I want to introduce you to ever so briefly, our Universalist, Olympia Brown. And we have a picture of her here. She was the first woman in the United States ordained with full denominational authority in 1863. And this picture, I actually took this picture at the Workhouse Museum in Lorton. And here she is, and I drew a little arrow so you could tell which one she is. You can tell she's a little bit younger, but that's Susan B. Anthony on the other side of the couch. So Olympia Brown's in the front row, really a very prominent person in the suffrage movement in the United States. She had served Universalist churches, including the church in Racine, Wisconsin, where I grew up 100 years after she served there. And she believed that a free and liberal religion would allow for other freedoms too, like the abolition of slavery and eventually voting rights, and all of that would come more naturally as people embraced this love of God. She kept her maiden name in 1873 when she got married. She found great support in her family, but not always in her congregations. And eventually she left the church to become a full-time activist for the women's suffrage movement. And at age 85, she was one of the few original suffragists to vote in the 1920 presidential election. There's also a reading from Olympia Brown in the back of our hymnal, taken from a sermon that she delivered in the Racine Church when she came back after having spent years in the suffrage movement. She charged the congregation to stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it. There is nothing in all the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before you the loftiest ideal, which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for the noble duty, and made the world beautiful for you. In Unitarian and Universalism, these ancestors found a faith which holds all souls equally and then calls us to act for a more just world. These leaders lived into their faith, upholding the worth of individuals as starting point for human society. Their resilience of faith inspired many people in their lifetimes and beyond, and this is our living tradition, and we are all part of this living tradition. And when we freely come into this congregation and congregations around the country, we are committing to personal growth and to building a world centered on love. It is a great journey to share together. So we'll sing our final hymn today, The Fire of Commitment. It's a hymn, and we have a slide of the folks who wrote this as well. This was written for the 50th anniversary of the first UU church in Nashville, Tennessee. The minister at their time, Reverend Mary Catherine Mourn, wrote the lyrics along with the church musician Jason Shelton. Jason is also the composer of Answering the Call of Love, and we have a Side with Love shirt right here. That's where that phrase comes from. Thank you for being our model today. Mary Catherine Mourn, you might know, served the church in Fairfax, Virginia for many years before going on to her current role. She's the president and CEO of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, that very same organization that needed the chalice on their paperwork to help get refugees out of Europe.
From the streams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment set our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way.
Could we please have a round of applause to thank Reverend Morgan for doing our service today?
Well, thank you all for sticking with us here and for being awesome Unitarian Universalists and carry the faith forward. We always say the same words as we extinguish our chalice in this congregation, and there's a slide for this. David Bumbaugh became a Universalist minister in 1957. That was 4 years before the Universalists merged, consolidated with the Unitarians. And then he, later in 1977, his wife joined him as a co-minister, and they had 20 years or so of co-ministry, including at Mount Vernon, UU Church, just down the road. So he later became a professor at Meadville Lombard Theological School, and he was a proponent, I would say, outspoken proponent of Universalist history, and thought that a lot had been lost by when the Universalists came with the Unitarians, and that centering love, that radical love, had been lost. So I think that he's probably pretty happy today with our new values. So let's read say his words now that you can see his face, and you can keep that in mind. And would you please rise to join in our community blessing. This church is dedicated to the proposition that by sighing all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity. And I send you forth from this service with words from Reverend Dr. Sophia Bentoncourt, who is a minister and professor who was elected president of the Unitarian Universalist Association in 2023. She is the first woman of color and openly queer person to be elected to that position, which is a 6-year term. She calls everyone to immerse yourself unapologetically in what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist in these days. Then go out into the world and live knowing that your faith matters. So may it be.